A crisis on the canal, the Suez Crisis of 1956. The year 1956 witnessed a defining moment in the annals of the 20th century, the Suez Crisis. This event was not just a regional conflict, but a global spectacle that drew the attention of the entire world. This international standoff, centered around the Suez Canal in Egypt, sent shockwaves across the globe, forever altering the geopolitical landscape. The reverberations of this crisis were felt far and wide, influencing international relations for years to come. It brought to the fore the waning power of traditional European empires, particularly Great Britain, and the rise of new players on the world stage. The crisis highlighted the shifting balance of power in the post-war era. This essay examines the Suez Crisis, focusing on Britain's role and the profound implications it had for its standing as a global superpower. The crisis was a stark reminder of the changing dynamics in international politics. The crisis revolved around the nationalization of the Suez Canal by Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser. His bold move was seen as a challenge to Western dominance in the region. This vital waterway, connecting the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, was a lifeline for global trade and held immense strategic importance. Control over the canal meant control over a significant portion of the world's oil supply. Britain, a major stakeholder in the canal, viewed Nasser's move as a direct threat to its interests and influence in the region. The nationalization was perceived as a direct affront to British prestige and economic interests. The crisis rapidly escalated into a military confrontation involving Britain, France, and Israel against Egypt. This tripartite invasion aimed to regain Western control over the canal and to depose Nasser. The ensuing conflict, though short-lived, exposed the limitations of British power and the shifting dynamics of the post-World War II world. It underscored the decline of European colonialism and the rise of nationalist movements. The Suez Crisis was a watershed moment for Britain. It forced the nation to confront its diminished role on the global stage. It marked a decisive turning point in its imperial history, signaling the end of its role as a leading global power. The crisis accelerated the process of decolonization and the emergence of new nations. The events of 1956 continue to resonate today, serving as a potent reminder of the complex interplay between nationalism, Cold War politics, and the decline of empires. The Suez Crisis remains a pivotal chapter in the history of the 20th century. The road to Suez: background and causes. To truly comprehend the Suez Crisis, one must delve into the historical backdrop against which it unfolded. This crisis was not an isolated event, but rather the culmination of various historical, political, and economic factors that had been brewing for decades. The seeds of the crisis were sown in the decades leading up to 1956, rooted in the complex interplay of colonialism, nationalism, and Cold War rivalries. These elements created a volatile environment that was ripe for conflict. The Suez Canal, since its construction in 1869, had become a symbol of European imperial dominance in the region. It was a critical maritime route that connected the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, significantly shortening the travel distance between Europe and Asia. Britain, with its vast empire and reliance on maritime trade, considered the canal vital to its strategic and economic interests. The canal was not just a passageway, but a lifeline for the British Empire, ensuring the swift movement of goods and military forces. It maintained a significant military presence in Egypt and held a controlling stake in the Suez Canal Company. This control was seen as essential to maintaining British influence in the region and protecting its colonial interests. However, the post-World War II era witnessed a rising tide of nationalism in Egypt and across the Arab world. The winds of change were blowing, and colonial powers were increasingly seen as oppressors rather than protectors. Gamal Abdel Nasser's rise to power in 1952 marked a turning point. His vision for Egypt was one of independence and self-determination, free from foreign control. Determined to assert Egyptian sovereignty and end foreign influence, Nasser embarked on a path of nationalization and non-alignment in the Cold War. His policies aimed to strengthen Egypt's position on the global stage. Nasser's decision to nationalize the Suez Canal in July 1956 proved to be the tipping point. This bold move was intended to reclaim control over Egypt's most valuable asset. He aimed to finance the construction of the Aswan Dam, a project of national pride and economic development using revenues from the canal. The dam was seen as a symbol of Egypt's modernization and progress. This bold move, however, was met with fierce opposition from Britain and France, who viewed it as a direct challenge to their interests. They were unwilling to relinquish their control without a fight. The international climate further exacerbated the situation. The world was already on edge due to the ongoing Cold War, and the Suez Crisis added fuel to the fire. The Cold War was at its peak, with the United States and the Soviet Union vying for influence in the Middle East. Both superpowers saw the region as strategically important and were keen to expand their spheres of influence. The Suez Crisis became entangled in this larger geopolitical struggle, adding another layer of complexity to an already volatile situation. The crisis was not just a regional conflict, but a flashpoint in the broader Cold War context. Britain's gamble, motivations, and involvement. Britain's motivations in the Suez Crisis were multifaceted, stemming from a potent mix of strategic considerations, economic imperatives, and a sense of wounded pride. The crisis was not just a political maneuver, but a reflection of Britain's struggle to maintain its waning influence on the global stage. The Suez Canal held immense strategic importance for Britain, serving as a crucial artery connecting the metropole to its vast colonial possessions in Asia and Africa. It was a lifeline for the British Empire, ensuring the swift movement of military and commercial vessels. Prime Minister Anthony Eden, deeply imbued with a sense of Britain's imperial legacy, perceived Nasser's nationalisation of the canal as a direct affront to British power and prestige. To Eden, this was not merely a political issue, but a personal challenge to Britain's historical dominance. He believed that appeasement had been a mistake in the face of Hitler's aggression in the 1930s and was determined not to repeat it with Nasser. Eden saw Nasser as a dictator who needed to be confronted decisively to prevent further emboldenment. Furthermore, the British economy relied heavily on the free flow of oil and goods through the Suez Canal. The canal was not just a strategic asset, but an economic lifeline, crucial for the sustenance of British industries and the overall economy. The nationalisation, they feared, would jeopardise this vital trade route and cripple their economy. The British public and media were rife with anxiety, fearing the economic repercussions of losing control over the canal. Eden's government, already facing domestic challenges, felt compelled to act decisively to protect British interests. The pressure from within the country added to the urgency of the situation, making a strong response seem inevitable. Driven by these factors, Britain, in collusion with France and Israel, hatched a plan to regain control of the canal. This alliance was formed out of mutual interests and a shared desire to curb Nasser's influence in the region. This clandestine collaboration, shrouded in secrecy and deceit, aimed to topple Nasser and install a more pliable regime in Egypt. The covert nature of the plan underscored the lengths to which these nations were willing to go to achieve their objectives. The plan involved an Israeli invasion of the Sinai Peninsula, followed by a joint British-French intervention under the pretext of separating the warring parties and safeguarding the canal. This pretext was designed to mask their true intentions and justify their military actions on the international stage. Days of crisis, key events and players. The Suez Crisis unfolded rapidly, marked by a series of dramatic events that captivated the world's attention. On October 29, 1956, Israeli forces launched a surprise attack on Egypt, swiftly advancing across the Sinai Peninsula towards the canal. This marked the beginning of the military phase of the crisis. Britain and France, as per their prearranged plan, issued an ultimatum to both Egypt and Israel, demanding they withdraw their forces from the canal zone. The ultimatum, heavily biased in favor of Israel, was designed to be unacceptable to Egypt. As anticipated, Nasser rejected the ultimatum, prompting the Anglo-French forces to launch airstrikes against Egyptian military targets on October 31st. The Anglo-French intervention, met with fierce resistance from Egyptian forces, exposed the limitations of their military capabilities. The operation, plagued by delays and logistical problems, failed to achieve its objective of swiftly capturing the canal zone. Meanwhile, the international community reacted with outrage and condemnation. The United States, caught off guard by the Anglo-French action and fearing a wider conflict, led the charge in condemning the invasion. President Dwight D. Eisenhower, furious at being kept in the dark by his allies, exerted immense pressure on Britain and France to withdraw. The Soviet Union, seizing the opportunity to exploit the crisis, threatened to intervene militarily on behalf of Egypt.